The hosts and guests on Everything's Messy podcast are not licensed healthcare professionals. The discussions in our episodes are not personalized medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider for medical guidance. Never delay seeking professional medical advice or emergency assistance because of our podcast. We encourage consulting with a healthcare professional before making any significant health changes. By listening to our podcast, you agree to the disclaimer. Thank you for listening to Everything's Messy podcast.
But one of the main things that I found through all of my research was that blood sugar imbalances, metabolic health in general, are really what's behind it. And so when let me look at that from my perspective. Nobody had really ever looked at those things for me. And so I ran some really comprehensive blood work tests. And sure enough, I had insulin resistance. I had nutrient deficiencies. I was deficient in all of the fat-soluble vitamins. Well, yeah, because you're not eating any fat.
You're eating plants. Yep.
You can't absorb any fat or fat-soluble vitamins if you don't have the adequate fat.
Hey, welcome to Everything's Messy podcast, where we celebrate the beautiful but messy life experiences that most, if not all, people go through. Get ready to embark on an exciting journey through the raw and unfiltered stories of everyday people. Here, we dive into messy realities of life, from making messy mistakes to triumphs and everything in between. Are you sensing a theme? That's right, it's messy. But this just isn't about the mess. It's about finding strength and resilience in the midst of it all. We'll explore how health, fitness, and wellness play a crucial role in navigating life's twists and very messy turns. And we'll challenge conventional systems, because sometimes the most unconventional paths lead to the greatest discoveries. Join us as we embrace the messy, beautiful, and endlessly fascinating stories. Each episode is a testament to the power of our messy journeys and the beauty that emerges from the mess. So grab your favorite beverage, coffee, sparkling water, whatever it may be, and prepare to be inspired. Are you ready? Let's get messy. Hey everyone, welcome to Everything's Messy podcast. I am your messy host, Sarah Wilson. Today I have with me Andrea Nicholson. Now, I want to make sure I get all of the things in there. So she is a board-certified holistic nutritionist, nutrition therapist master, restrictive wellness practitioner, and Insulin IQ certified by way of criminal scene investigative journalism. Is that correct?
Yeah, crime scene investigation. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's quite a lot. And I have a few questions about that. But first, welcome. Very.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is exciting. I'm not sure that I'm familiar with Insulin IQ, and being a diabetic for almost 28 years now, I'm very curious to know what that is.
Yeah, it's a company founded in Utah. One of the main original founders was Dr. Ben Bickman. He's a professor at BYU, and he's a metabolic researcher. He formed a partnership with some other practitioners in the local area that I think mostly worked out at the same gym. And they just have created a whole program for helping people reverse insulin resistance and take control of their metabolic health.
I love that.
And then they turned it into a certification program as well, and kind of sharing the things that they've been using successfully with their clients. And I just love all the things he does when he puts all of his information out and his sharing his research. And being a professor, he's really easy to understand. And so he's just one of my favorites to follow. So of course I had to take his certification.
Of course. No, I like that. I'm mad that I didn't know about it before, but now I do. So I'm going to make sure I check that out. So here, obviously, everything's messy, and we always start with a very messy story. So why don't you take us on your journey of the messy story?
Yeah, it is a messy story. So all the things. So yes, I was working as a crime scene investigator, which doesn't innately seem like it's all that relevant, but that just happened to be my career when I started my own health.
That's actually kind of cool.
It is kind of cool. And it was a fun career, but it obviously has its downsides as well. It comes with high stress and lack of sleep and poor eating and all the things. And a lot of heart disease risk, like a lot of career fields have when they're high stress and random hours and all of the things. And that was actually my personal family history as well. My birth family all died of heart disease and suffered with heart attacks and bypasses and, all the surgical interventions as well. And then all died young. Thankfully, I was adopted as an infant, so I was not orphaned at 15, or I would have been when everyone was gone.
Sure.
So that was always kind of in the back of my mind. In my 20s and teens, of course, it wasn't that big of a driver. So I ate like everybody else. I ate all the junk food, did all the things. I did happen to always like healthy foods as well. So like eating vegetables was never a struggle for me. Some of those kinds of things I was always good at, but I distinctly remember like eating entire sleeves of Chips Ahoy cookies or animal crackers with frosting. Just all the things, all the junk. And so that was what took me down the original bad messy path was just the standard American eating, terrible foods, snacking way too often, all the things. So then in my 20s, I started kind of gaining the weight and didn't really like it. I had gained a little bit through college and, the standard story. But working the career, we heard a lot about police officers having heart attacks. And like that was a big topic of conversation, especially in our agency. We were really a pretty health-focused agency.
And where did you work?
Classes.
What city were you in?
Arapahoe County in Colorado.
Okay.
So just south of the Denver metro area.
Sure. So Colorado Springs area or?
It's between Denver and the Springs. So yeah, kind of in that
Monument
area.
I'm thinking Monument.
Yeah, just a little bit north of Monument. Yep.
Okay. All right. Yeah, pretty busy, I would say.
Yeah, it was really busy. And, thankfully the county as a whole really had a good wellness focus. And so we always had wellness classes and, experts were coming in and stuff. And our sheriff at the time was really keen on, avoiding heart attacks for the staff. And so he brought in this cardiologist team to do this really comprehensive testing where they did like the carotid scans and the really in-depth particle testing and EKGs and stress testing and all these things.
That's pretty progressive. It's been a while since I've worked for the police department, but as a 911 dispatcher, I don't remember any ever going through that.
Right? And I have not heard about this kind of thing from anyone else either. But so I was really fortunate to be in this place where this was offered. Of course, we paid for it, but it was at a great discount because it was offered to the whole agency. And so I went through this training and I was in my like late 20s. I think I was like 28 when I first did this testing. And I was reasonably healthy. I was maybe 20 pounds overweight, nothing significant. Didn't really have any major health problems, but, had that family history that was always in the back of my mind. And of course, being heart disease, and this was a cardiac test, it was like, okay, this is perfect. This is exactly what I need. And it was terrible. All of my results were awful. My arterial age was older than my chronological age. They found evidence of plaque forming. I had all the wrong lipid profiles, just all the things, even though outwardly, most people would have said you look healthy.
And not a smoker,
never had smoked, had a reasonably healthy life. It's not like I was living on fast food. I mean, I certainly had my indulgences, and compared to how I'd eat now, I can look back and see how terrible it was.
Sure.
But really, in the grand scheme of terrible diets, it wasn't actually that bad. And so I was like, okay, this is not good.
So you're strictly working with bad genetics at this point.
Well, that was kind of the prevailing theory because I didn't think I was doing too poorly. Mm-hmm. But obviously I had to look at that because I didn't want to just sit back and blame my genetics because then there's nothing I can do.
Sure.
And I really wanted to own it. I wanted to know that I'm doing everything in my power to, take all of the control that I can and reverse what I can, prevent what I can, like whatever. I didn't want to just sit back and say, well, guess I'm going to die early like everybody else. That just didn't sit right with me. Mm-hmm. But they were really no help, unfortunately, when it was like, okay, what do I do? What do I change? What do I implement? He's like, eat a heart-healthy diet, exercise, and don't smoke. And I'm like,
thanks.
Okay, yeah, super not helpful at all. And they really couldn't give me anything more in-depth than that. It wasn't...
Did they try to push a statin on you? Did they try?
Thankfully not.
Okay.
Most of the people that went through this did get that recommendation. And of course, that made a lot of people mad because they felt like, well, you're just telling everybody they need statins. And I was one of the handful that was not given that. So clearly that wasn't purely their mission.
Would you have taken it?
Obviously. Probably not, honestly, or at least not right then. I would have at least done some actions first and really tried to turn it around for me personally. I try to avoid medications where I can. And so if I don't feel like it's necessary, if I don't feel like that's my only option, then I'm going to try other things first and 100%. I'll circle back to that if I have to. But thankfully, I was not prescribed anything, but I wasn't really given any helpful advice either. What is a heart-healthy diet? What does that even mean? And so, it was kind of like...
And even with a heart-healthy diet that they prescribe, is it actually the right one?
Right. Yeah. But they couldn't even really tell me what that meant. Mm. So I was sort of...
All this information to just left with, and now you have to dissect.
Right. It's like, well, don't smoke. Well, I never did. So that obviously is not what's causing my problem. So that's not helpful. I wasn't super duper active, so I knew that was one thing I could do. I could increase my exercise, which I did. So I did my own kind of basic research. I went to the American Heart Association and I looked at some of the common advice that was being put out there and, cut your fat intake, reduce your calories, exercise more, like all the basically standard advice. And that's what I did. Did all of that, committed for the next year. I exercised a lot. I did end up actually losing the weight. Felt much better. started eating what I thought was much better, low fat, a lot more whole grains. Ultimately throughout that year, ended up even transitioning to a plant-based diet, cut out basically all meats. I still had some seafood and occasional eggs, but it was not my daily fare. Daily was whole, real foods, vegetables, lean protein, or leaner fat sources. So it wasn't so like saturated fats and that kind of thing, but I did use like olive oil and those kind of things. But even that was minimal. It was like as little as I possibly could need to cook whatever I was cooking. And that was really it. So it was whole grains and it was vegetables pretty much was the bulk of it, and some fruit. Went back a year later, did the testing again, and it was all worse. Like monumentally worse. Worse. All the profiles, all my lipid profiles got worse.
That's so much.
Arterial age went from 4 years older to 11 years older. They now could visibly see plaque in my carotid arteries. Like just all the things went the wrong way. And it made no sense. I was
so frustrating.
But whole plants. This was not Doritos and Oreos. This was whole plants and whole grains and fruits and vegetables. Like, how in the world can I be developing heart disease? And so that was really what took me down the path of, okay, well, clearly conventional medicine is not helping me, because all of what little they could even tell me to do made everything worse. I was eating less. I was cutting my fat. I was cutting my calories. I was exercising. Like, seriously, I could not figure out how it could get worse. And I still didn't want to just blame my genetics.
Sure.
It just didn't sit right with me to just blame something I don't have any control over. And I knew that there's a lot more to it. I know heart disease is primarily a lifestyle disease. I just couldn't figure out what was going wrong in my own lifestyle, because I was doing all the things that they were telling us to do. And so that's when I really just had to use my investigative skills to really figure out what was going on. And that's kind of where I ultimately went.
So what did you determine?
So through that process of really researching and understanding like what drives heart disease, all just trying to really understand what was actually happening, I kind of stumbled upon this whole world of functional medicine, which wasn't really like a big thing. I mean, this was almost 20 years ago. So that wasn't a big term. That wasn't something people talked about. It's much more well-known now. It's grown.
Thankfully.
Thankfully, it's grown in popularity. It's grown in access. It's, there's a whole lot more practitioners in that space, and it's a lot more widely available now. But ultimately, that's kind of what I stumbled into was, really understanding the root cause, really understanding what was really driving heart disease. And, that's still a hotly debated topic even today. There's the cholesterol and lipid profile arguments, and there's the, stress and inflammation arguments, and there's the genetic arguments. And, there's still all these debates today.
Right.
And I was eating all carbs because that's all plants are, carbs. And so I was a carbitarian. I was deficient
like
in protein.
I like that term.
I was deficient in all of the things we actually need. And so it turns out I had actually lost the weight, but I had also lost a lot of muscle and lean tissue and healthy tissue, which makes your blood sugar regulation and your insulin sensitivity that much worse, because your muscle is one of the biggest glucose sinks.
Right. So
if you're losing muscle, if you're losing lean, healthy tissue, you can't store those adequately. You can't utilize them adequately. And so there was just a whole lot of things I was doing wrong.
Were you presenting any symptoms at this point of like, fatigue or anything that you just notice that you're like, I'm doing all of the things and I just don't feel well?
Yeah, I did have fatigue. I blamed it on my career and the random sleep schedule and the high stress loads. And obviously that 100% was contributing for sure. But even when I wasn't on call, so I was sleeping normally, it didn't really get better. So I did have low energy. I did have just kind of a low drive to do stuff. I just wasn't all that motivated. I think that was actually the nutrient deficiencies that were leaving me feeling that way. As soon as I rebalanced vitamin D and those kinds of things, all that came back. But all of it
still, midnights aren't for the faint of heart. I will say that.
Yes, 100%. Shift work is not ideal for anyone, for sure. So through the whole process, I figured out that I had insulin resistance. I was eating way too many carbs. And because I was eating all the carbs and following the standard advice of, eating every couple of hours, I was also spiking my insulin constantly. From 5 a.m. until 10 p.m., I was constantly eating meals or snacks or drinks or shakes or some kind of pill or potion or something in an effort to do the right things, but I was actually doing all the wrong things. And so I had all those metabolic dysfunctions. I had all the nutrient deficiencies. Through the process, I learned I was actually chronically constipated. I didn't even know that.
Wow.
I didn't know that was a thing. That was just my state. I had no idea. So I learned a whole lot more about my body and about what should be happening and what shouldn't be happening. And well, this may be common, but it's not normal and it's certainly not ideal. And just learning all the things and becoming much more aware of actually really how bad I was feeling. I wouldn't have thought so at the beginning, but the more I learned, the more I started paying attention, and the better I started feeling, the more I realized how bad I actually had been feeling. And yeah, I think that's common. We get so used to feeling terrible.
Our body's amazing. It adapts to the most undesirable atmosphere that it possibly can, and it still pushes on. It really is amazing.
Yep.
So talk a little bit about, being a type 1 diabetic. I am familiar with having to regulate blood sugar and things like that. But you're now even saying that even for those who don't present with prediabetes or anything like that, that blood sugar regulation is a huge component in their diet.
Yeah, it really is. And, I think the earlier we can catch these things, the easier they are to turn around. Obviously, in a type 1 situation, that one, there's probably not a whole lot.
I had somebody tell me
that we can do to prevent it or turn it around.
Yeah. But they literally told me that sucks, that you're type 1. There's nothing you can do. And it was like, oh, thanks.
Yeah, great. Yay. So outside of those kinds of conditions, for anyone that's in the more type 2 realm, the prediabetes, or even just any health condition that you don't like, blood sugar is one of the biggest drivers of internal inflammation, of low energy use, and that can happen systemically throughout your entire body, or it can be particular organ systems just don't work super well, because insulin resistance doesn't develop in every tissue simultaneously. It shows up in different ways. So much like autoimmune conditions can show up in different tissues for different people, insulin resistance can too. It often starts, in the liver, the fat cells, the muscle cells, those kinds of things, but it can also set up in the alpha cells of the pancreas, where then your glucagon system gets messed up. It can also set up in your kidneys, and you can end up with chronic kidney failure. It can show up in your heart, and you can end up with all the heart problems, or your blood vessels, and you end up with atherosclerosis. It can show up in your brain, and you end up with the dementias and some of the neurological conditions or mental health conditions. And so it can show up in a variety of ways. And so all of these come back to addressing metabolic health, and blood sugar is one of the easiest things to look at. And really, it's not even blood sugar per se, it's really the insulin is what we really need to be looking at. But blood sugar is the thing most people talk about, that conventional medicine focuses on. Really, it's the insulin, and the insulin resistance is the thing that we really want to pay attention to.
So how your body is actually utilizing the insulin that it's creating.
And how much it's creating to do the job that it needs to be able to do. If it's taking a lot of insulin to do the job, then you've got resistance for sure.
Wow.
So, it's kind of the boy that cried wolf. It gets louder and louder and louder, and it's just not working anymore. And so it continues to fail.
That's a whole lot of information to process. I'm just kind of curious. So, is it just, so you were saying it's actually testing the insulin. So somebody just can't go get a glucometer and check their blood sugar, and if they're in the normal ranges, is that going to help them, or is it something a little more in depth than that?
It generally is going to be a little bit more in depth than that. That can be an indicator, but our blood sugars are fluctuating throughout the day, every day, all the time. So depending on that moment that you tested, you may or may not pick up on anything. So what we really want to know from more conventional lab testing is, what's your insulin actually doing? That's a much better marker. And so some practitioners will look at fasting insulin. Some will look at C-peptide, which is a related factor to insulin. It's actually a protein that's attached to the insulin when it's first created. And it lasts a little bit longer in the system, so sometimes it's easier to pick up on. But either way, you really want to get an assessment for how much insulin is your body producing, especially in a fasted state when it's just there for homeostasis. It's there to do all of the other functions in the body that really don't have anything to do directly with blood sugar. Because insulin has lots and lots of roles. We just think about it in relation to blood sugar. Sure. That's one of its most famous roles.
Hormones, really, everything.
Yeah, it plays a role in the whole hormone cascade. There's insulin receptors on every single cell in the body. It's a cell signaling molecule. It's a growth and, storage hormone. It does a lot of different things. So, but that's the one we really want to start with, is what is your insulin actually doing? Because your blood sugar will be totally normal for decades as your insulin is climbing. But your insulin is still working well enough to keep it at that level. So if you only look at blood sugar, you could be slowly developing prediabetes over decades and not even know.
Wow.
But if you know your insulin is climbing, then you know that's a problem. And that gives you something very specific and tangible that you can go after before you ever get to prediabetes.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully, if you are able to figure that out and the doctor that you go to, they will order the test for you, because that's a whole nother can of worms of fighting these doctors to order those tests.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's one, it's not a very expensive test, but a lot of insurance companies will deny it because there's no medication they can give you based on that. So if your insulin levels are high, there's no medication they can give you. They can give you stuff for high blood sugar, but you're decades in the mix already by then. So you're much better off if you can find this out early, before your blood sugars ever start to rise or before you end up with any serious pathology, because it's much easier to reverse the earlier you catch it. That's true in every condition. I mean, that's why we do all the cancer screenings we do, because early detection is much easier to deal with.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with this. If you can catch your insulin rising way before your blood sugars rise, it's just that much easier to fix.
Right. Okay. So what was your turning point then as you start to put these puzzle pieces together and you're seeing kind of the paradigm shift a little bit? What's maybe the first thing you're putting into action to help you with this?
Well, diet, of course, was the first thing I looked at, because that's the biggest driver of all these things. What we put in our mouths and how often and how much are exactly the biggest factor to pay attention to when it comes to all of these lifestyle diseases. And so that was the first thing I really had to look at, is what was I eating? How often was I eating? How much was I eating? What was I lacking? What was I getting too much of? Like all of those things. And so just really at a high level, I figured out really quick, I was eating far too often with the every 2 to 3 hours. That was spiking my insulin all day long, keeping it high all day long, never allowing it to come back to baseline. So I needed a strategy that would help me eat less often and do the opposite of the common advice to eat every 2 hours.
Which is with intermittent fasting, I would have presumed.
I did ultimately end up adding intermittent fasting. So first of all, I went to just meals. I stopped doing all the in-between snacking and the eating at 5 a.m. and eating at 10 p.m. and all the snacks in between. I went back to just eating meals. Ultimately, once I also restructured the foods that I was eating, I increased my protein, increased my healthy fats, decreased the carbohydrate content. For me personally, I also ended up eliminating all grains and all the refined foods. I still do vegetables and limited fruits, but I really cut out all the starchy stuff, all the grains, all of that kind of thing from at least my daily life. I'm not going to say that I don't ever indulge.
Oh, sure. She's balanced for sure.
Right.
And were you referring to the glycemic index as you were looking for the fruits and vegetables that you should be eating?
Yeah, for the most part, I was really looking at, I didn't look specifically at glycemic index, although you could make the same decision from that as well. I just mostly was looking at the carbohydrate content and just the nutrient profile in general. How quickly was it going to digest? What would I be eating it with? Fruit by itself is basically a sugar bomb all by itself. But when it's paired with other things, or it comes after fats and proteins or those kinds of things, then it absorbs and digests differently. Mm-hmm. So just really looking at the specific foods I was eating, the portion sizes of each thing that I was eating, how I was combining things. And, was I really hitting those essential nutrients, the essential amino acids, the total protein count, the healthy fats that I really needed to get the fat-soluble vitamins and just the healthy fats in general. And then over time, as my body kind of adapted to this whole new diet, then it was natural to start doing more intermittent fasting because I just literally wasn't hungry.
Sure, you didn't need it.
5 a.m.
Yeah.
Thought for all those years that I thought fasting was like the craziest idea ever when I first heard it. I'm like, no, really, I'm starving at 5 a.m. No, I had created the habit of hunger because I had eaten that way for my whole life. So breakfast was always one of my favorite types of foods. I always loved breakfast foods and going out to breakfast, and that was just always my favorite thing. So I was a natural breakfast eater, but most breakfast foods are super high carb, sugar bombs. They're basically dessert. It's really not serving you. And so when I restructured all my meals, I found that I really wasn't actually all that hungry in the mornings anymore. So I still love a lot of the breakfast foods. I still love eggs. I love omelets, all of those kinds of things.
That's all high protein.
It becomes lunch or dinner.
Right. And that's all high protein.
Right.
Yeah.
And much more satiating, much, much fuller. I don't have the sugar cravings and the carb cravings anymore. It's much easier and more sustainable for me to eat this way.
And so how long was this transition for you? So you get off all the plant-based stuff, which they actually put me on a vegan-based diet after my heart attack, became fairly severely anemic to the point where they were talking blood transfusion. And I just, I was not going to do that. So I, like you, kind of went down this whole path of cannot be the answer. And these were doctors telling me this.
Yeah.
But that whole process took about a year. Would you say about the same for you?
Yeah, I think initially I was paying attention to just the carb content. So at the very beginning, I was still kind of mostly plant-based, but I increased my fat and I decreased the super starchy vegetables. So it took me a while to kind of get to the point where it was like, okay, now I need to add in the protein. It took me a while to just like mentally wrap my head around going back to eating more animal products.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's a big difference, you know, texture-wise, cooking-wise, you know, meals, all the things. And so that was a little bit slower process for me. And I started with like seafood every day and eggs every day and those kinds of things. And then ultimately it was like, okay. And so that it took me, once I kind of decided this is the path I'm taking, then yeah, I would say about a year. But in the early stages, mostly I stayed plant-based for the most part for a while. I just increased the fat intake and decreased the starchy content, and then decreased the frequency of my meals. And then, yeah, ultimately I've added all that in. Now I'm much more on the other end of the spectrum, and I'm far more carnivore than I would be plant-based. Yeah. I still eat vegetables and fruits and stuff because I enjoy them. But I have days when I look at what I ate all day and it's like, I didn't have any plants at all today.
That's okay.
Yeah. And it works. And those are actually the days I feel the best. Yep. I just happen to enjoy vegetables, but I do feel the best when I'm actually not having them.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, you know, so many people I talk to, they actually swear by the vegan diet, and I have no judgment. I'm glad it works for them. Yep. But for someone who actually experienced it on the worst end that I could have, I mean, I was feeling terrible. And I didn't even feel this bad before I had my heart attack. And I'm thinking, what is going on? And it amazes me still the impact that food has on our bodies.
Yep.
And dialing into that and just really paying attention to what you're feeling when you're putting something into your mouth. That just still blows my mind.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think there is a huge variation in what works for each of us. We each have completely different gut systems and different histories and different microbiomes and different hormone levels and ages and genetics and just all the environmental things, all the factors, that there isn't going to be one diet that works for you. And the likelihood is there isn't going to be one diet that's going to work for you forever either.
Sure.
You're probably going to need to change it. When I first went plant-based, I loved it. I felt amazing. I felt light. I felt free.
And I heard
all the things. And like you, ultimately, I got to the point where it was like my muscles hurt every single day. They felt heavy. My workouts were suffering. Like I did have problems. At the time, I didn't attribute it to the diet. I look back now and I'm like, well, of course you had all those issues because you had screaming inflammation, lacking in nutrients, super low in all the things you actually needed to support the workout.
Sure.
Like, yeah, of course. It makes sense in hindsight. But at the time, I would never have blamed what I was eating at all because it seemed so healthy.
Sure.
Nothing but plants.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I feel like that. And I feel like the conventional medical system really pushes that plant-based. And again, maybe it does work for some, but it doesn't work for all. And I wish there was there is other outlets, but if you're just trusting your doctor, probably 99.9% of them are going to say, yeah, go vegan, go plant-based. And that's incorrect. It just is.
And sadly, the vast majority of the people giving that advice have no nutrition training.
I know. When I found out the fact that doctors literally spend one day on nutrition in their whole scope of actually going to medical school, what?
If that. Some of them don't get any. And some of them get more because they opt into, they take stuff on their own. But yeah, most medical schools get no nutrition or lifestyle training at all.
That's so scary.
I do think that's changing. I think the current younger crop of doctors are, first of all, coming in with more base knowledge before they ever even go to medical school. And they're much more interested in the lifestyle side of things. So I think a lot of the medical schools are coming around, but there's a whole lot of doctors that have already come through medical school and never got any of that training. And
scary.
To their demise and the society, we put a lot of the onus on them to be the experts in everything, which is not fair. They have a lot to learn in medical school with just learning everything there is to know about the body. And then you add in all the pharmacokinetics and surgical interventions. And there's a lot. And so to add nutrition and lifestyle on top of that is really asking a lot of them. That's why we have nutritionists and personal trainers and physical therapists and acupuncturists and chiropractors. And Well, that's why we have all these other fields, because nobody should possibly be expected to know everything there ever was to know about health.
And that's incredibly true. I just wish there would be some more continuity between this side and that they would
100%.
talk to each other.
100%. And I wish they were more willing to say, I actually have no training in nutrition. Here's a reference for you to go get some real education on what to eat. Or here's a recommendation for a personal trainer or a physical therapist. Or, I wish they were more willing to say, that's really not my purview, but here's a resource that will give you that. And so many of them just spout off what they've been told that isn't really based on anything real, unfortunately. And I hate that position for them, because none of us like being the person who has to say, I actually don't know.
Yeah.
Nobody likes being that person.
And I've said before, that's why they call it practicing medicine, because they really don't know. So they're practicing. So it's really sad. And that's a whole other podcast. Can you kind of, so you've gone on this journey, you made the shift. And so then because of your background, that makes you want to jump in and just learn everything that you wanted to learn about it. How did you get started on all of that?
Yeah, so I had been kind of a generic health coach, just helping people on the side for a long time when I first started my own journey and had lost the weight and people were asking me questions and stuff. And so then when I hit this pivotal moment of realizing that everything I'd ever been told was actually wrong and I needed to do the opposite of all of the standard advice, that spurred me to really dial up my education, go back to school, learn all the things. I ultimately did go back and redo this cardiovascular training or testing one more time after I implemented my whole protocol, just to see okay, I feel amazing, but did it actually do what I was hoping it would do? And it did.
It did. Wow.
My arterial age is now 8 years younger than my chronological age. Plaque was found. I ultimately went to have a coronary artery calcium score done as well, and that was 0. And that was just a couple of years ago. So that was 15 years later, still 0.
Wow. So, and how long had you been sort of animal-based up to that point?
At the time, that was right around the time I was fully transitioned into eating all of the animal products. So I was back on more omnivorous eating at that point when I did the calcium score. When I did the cardiovascular screening, I was still in the seafood, egg arena mostly,
but still enough of a change,
chicken and that kind of thing. But I was not plant-based anymore.
Yeah,
I was definitely more in the omnivorous category. I don't think I had fully added everything back in yet at that point.
Wow,
but
those
still, so anyway, that's amazing. So that was the real motivator for me to be okay, so clearly I do have some answers here. There are a lot of people that need this information. Studies are showing that upwards of 88 to 93% of the population have metabolic dysfunction on some level, whether that be lipids or obesity or, blood sugar issues, whatever. They have at least one category that's out of whack. That's pretty much everybody.
That's everybody, yeah.
Really, everybody needs this information. And even if you do have type 1 or, some condition that can't be reversed, this information still matters.
100%.
Because even for you, even though you're not going to be able to reverse your entire condition, you still want to take as little insulin as you can possibly take.
Exactly.
Just like I don't want to be producing a ton of insulin, you don't want to be shooting up a bunch of insulin either.
I really
it causes all the same problems, whether it's injected or produced. And so this information really does matter for everyone. And whether it's heart disease like it was in my family, or type 2 diabetes, or type 1 diabetes like in your case, cancer, Alzheimer's, autoimmune conditions, all of these things have a metabolic basis to them. And so this information really does apply to everybody.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of clients with thyroid imbalance, Hashimoto's and things like that?
I do get a fair number of those. A lot of them also have a lot of gut issues. And so when we clean up the gut, a lot of times that goes away and it's also in remission. So, every case is different. We really have to look at each person individually to figure out how it is they got to where they are. That's the whole investigation side of this.
Sure.
We really have to know, how did you get here? What are you currently doing that's contributing or causing it? What are you actually dealing with? What do your labs show? What are your symptoms? We have to, really do a deep dive into how did you get here? And then we can implement really good protocols to get you out of it, or at least improve it as much as we possibly can.
Yeah. Yeah. But what a testament. I mean, here, I know you said you're at an adoptive family, but knowing enough about your birth family, and they had all of these horrible, horrible diseases, you take that information, you turn it around, and it actually worked. Like that's spectacular. And just to see the writing on the wall, to me, that's truly, that gives me chills, because we don't hear success stories like that in the, general medical side. You don't hear that, oh, it was reversed. Oh, I don't have to take this medicine anymore. No, in fact, they've prescribed me 3 more medicines and I don't know why I'm taking them. I mean, that just the contrast of that is really amazing. I mean, at least to me anyway, I think that's definitely.
And, my birth mom passed away at 49.
Wow.
I turned 45 tomorrow. So like that was the final realization in my late 20s when I realized it, that if I kept going down that path, I was already more than halfway through my life. If I followed in her footsteps. And even, 20 years ago, that was not okay with me.
Sure.
And certainly now it's like, man, facing only 4 more years, that would not be okay with me.
Devastating. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, of course, now that's my primary driver, is to do everything I can to not make that my future.
Yeah.
And at this point, I don't have any reason to believe that I will perish in 4 years or anytime soon, because I do have all the markers that show that my health is in perfect shape.
Right. Yeah. And so this isn't one of those talks about, self-discipline or motivation. Like, you had the knowledge and the drive, and you put it to work. You did something with that. And I just think that's very commendable. I really do.
Thanks. I think it's difficult for a lot of people, and everyone has to find their own way. There's no one simple, like, here's how you dial it up, or here's how you get motivated. Like, you have to find that out for yourself, but it's so worth it.
It has to be. And again, it's an investment in yourself, into your future, into your kids, into your, we talk about that all the time on this show. Choose your hard. Yeah, it may be hard today to not eat the way that you want to eat, but how are you going to do 5 years from now when you have these terrible diseases or whatever you're dealing with? I mean, it's very, that's just anyway. So I'm going to kind of shift here a little bit. And I'm sort of reading some of your questions here, which I love, but the conventional medicine, right, and the lab testing, what is missing?
Yeah, so we talked about the fasting insulin. I think that's a really key one that everyone needs to have. And, we want this to be in a comprehensive protocol or in a whole panel. We don't just want to get like this marker and that marker and this. We really do want the whole marker. So we want the same things your doctor would run, the CBC and the CMP and, the basic things that your doctor is going to run all the time. We want that on the same panel if possible, so that we can really get the whole comprehensive view. But I think the fasting insulin is a big one that goes along with the fasting glucose that's part of the comprehensive metabolic panel that your doctor will probably order. A hemoglobin A1C, they sometimes will order. Usually that one's like once a year or less, but that's a pretty standard marker. So those 3 will tell you a lot about your blood sugar handling. I think depending on the case, getting a really good comprehensive thyroid panel is really important. Not just looking at TSH and not just looking at T4, which most doctors will only run TSH. And then if that's out of whack, then they'll look at a T4. But neither one of those tell you the whole picture by themselves. TSH is actually a brain hormone, but it's a brain hormone that's telling the thyroid what to do.
Sure.
So if you're only looking at that, you're not even looking at the thyroid, really. There could be 100 things going wrong if your TSH is too high or too low, but you wouldn't know that because you're only looking at the one hormone.
The one hormone.
T4 is a thyroid hormone, but it's only one, and it's the inactive form. And there's total that's attached to proteins, and there's free where it's not bound. And so it's just much more complicated. So you do want to look at the total T4, total T3, free T3, and free T4, plus the antibodies and a reverse T3. So those are the full thyroid panel. I think a full iron panel is also important, where you actually get your full iron status, your total iron binding capacity, your iron saturation, and your ferritin. That's going to tell you how much stored iron you have.
Yeah.
Those are often not run either. So I think that's good. And then there's the whole host of inflammatory markers. So you've got your C-reactive protein, your high sensitivity C-reactive protein, your homocysteine, liver enzymes are really good. You'll get some of them on the standard panel, but there's others that can be looked at. If you have any kind of gut issues, gallbladder issues, you've had your gallbladder out, like these are things that you want to know, or you don't want to get your gallbladder out. These are things you want to know so that you can keep all of your organs for as long as possible.
Definitely. That's great. I'm, definitely a layman when it comes to these, but I've seen them enough in my life to look on the panel and be like, oh, they did, and then as I got forward and started noticing more with the thyroid, and it was like I had to ask for these tests, and oh, lo and behold, oh, you have Hashimoto's. Oh, well, gee, that'd have been nice to know a few years ago. Just things like that. And you were saying that that's all related to the gut. So is taking a probiotic enough? Is, doing the kefir and the, fermented stuff, is that enough? Or is there other things to be implemented for that?
It depends on what's going on. Those can all be great. They can make them worse for some people, only like more so from a symptom standpoint. Not that it's going to make Hashimoto's worse necessarily, but anytime you can support your gut is a good thing. And fermented foods and cultured foods can be great for that. But there are some gut conditions where they'll get super bloated or they'll have gut like irritation if they have too many fermented or cultured foods. So it depends on what's going on. If you're constipated versus diarrhea, obviously those are completely different. So it just depends. Are you lacking digestive enzymes? Do you actually have a pathogen? What's really going wrong with your gut? So what's driving really any autoimmune condition related to the gut is gut inflammation. So that can be leaky gut, that can be a pathogen, that can be food sensitivities. A lot of autoimmune conditions are triggered by things like gluten or certain things in dairy. So it depends a lot on really what's going on with the gut. But a lot of times if we fix the gut, then we reduce that overall inflammatory load. And sometimes that helps the immune system then calm down, which can put autoimmune conditions in reverse.
Yeah. Well, and I read somewhere that the gut is like your second brain, but then I even think there's some things coming out now where it's actually it's the first brain that actually is telling your brain all of the things that are going on, which means everything starts in the gut. And that means if you have an unhealthy gut, you have good luck.
And most of your neurotransmitters are actually made in your gut, and they're made by either the gut tissue or the bacteria in the gut. And so, yeah, you really do need to take care of your gut. And it's not just about the overt digestive symptoms. So you may be going to the bathroom every day. You may not have bloating and gas and heartburn and all the things. You may not have any digestive symptoms at all. That doesn't mean you don't have a gut imbalance.
Sure.
And so, because that involves, are you adequately breaking down your food? Are you adequately absorbing the nutrients from your food? Are you eating foods that you're sensitive to? And so that's causing inflammation. You may have the perfect bacterial profile. You may have all the normal bathroom habits, or think you do. Like I thought I did. I didn't, but I thought I did. Those can all be contributory problems. And so we really have to look again at every individual case and figure out what is going on for you. I've had lots of people that would have told me and did tell me that their gut's fine, they feel fine. And we end up looking at the gut anyway, because we know that's related to so many things. And sure enough, their stool testing shows all kinds of problems. And once we address those, a lot of times the symptoms go away too.
Wow. That's amazing to me. And again, I go back to how come doctors aren't doing this? Not to want to put you out of business, obviously, but it's it seems to me to be a no-brainer. And it's frustrating that we have to go outside. So
yeah, and then even worse than that, if you do it like with me or some other practitioner, and then you take that information to your doctor, they often will discount it.
Yeah.
And then that just leaves you as the patient that much more confused. You're like, well, now who do I believe?
Oh,
I have this paper that says this, and the doctor that's telling me those are false, and it's not helping anyone.
I have been told all of it. I've been told, you just have anxiety. I've been told, get off of WebMD, which I actually haven't. That's not where I get my information, but that's what I've been told. I've been told, have you gone to medical school? If you haven't, let me be the doctor. And it's like, I'm just trying to figure out, I'm trying to do your job, my job, everybody's job, so I can get any answers. And they're very, not all of them, but some are very irritated that, I come out and, try to be an informed patient, and that's just, it's frustrating.
And to me, that's a sign of a doctor you probably don't want to work with.
No, yeah, exactly.
You really do want the one who goes, oh, this is new information. Thank you. I'm going to learn from this. And they come back with more knowledge, a lot of the best doctors out there have been influenced by their patients who educated them on their own condition and came in with research or books or whatever. And the doctor actually took it, learned from it, started implementing those things, and has completely changed their practice now. So yeah, I'm not a fan of anyone in any field really who doesn't believe you should advocate for yourself.
Exactly.
Ask questions and bring in your own research. I think you should. You have ultimate responsibility for you and your health. And if they don't like it, sorry, that's on them.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you want everybody to know? What is your message that you want everybody to know?
I think just that you are responsible for you and you are responsible for your own health. And what that means is you have to be willing to ask the hard questions. You have to be willing to push back and say, what are my options? What are my alternatives? Who else can I talk to about this? Who else should I be seeing for this? What else can I do? Are medications my only option? Is that medication my only option? Do I have other choices? What else can I be doing? You have to advocate for yourself. You know your body better than anyone else. So whether it's because they're not giving you the answers, they won't order the labs, they won't do whatever it is you need them to do, or they're discounting the things that you're telling them you want, you have to advocate for yourself and keep finding either people that will help you, sources that will help you, resources, answers. Keep digging, keep researching. The answers are out there. You just have to find them. So be your own best advocate.
I love that. I love that message of just learn how to self-advocate. That's the most important thing. I love that. So if somebody wanted to work with you or find you or all of this, I mean, we've had a lot of messy, rabbit holes that we went down this hour. So where can they find you?
Yeah, the best place is my website, which is healthylifewithandrea.com. From there, all my contact info, podcast, email, all the things are there.
That's wonderful. And I'll make sure to put that in the show notes. So this has been fabulous, Andrea. Thank you so much. I think you are just full of, I'm like a little sponge trying to soak everything up. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Everything's Messy podcast. If you don't mind, if you'd head on over to wherever you listen to the podcast, like, subscribe, maybe leave me a review. I would really appreciate it. Also, make sure to check out my new website, www.everythingsmessy.com. Social media is where you can find me. Instagram at Everything's Messy Podcast. Same with Facebook. I'm on X at Everything's Mess. And if you'd like to reach out to me for email, I'm everythingsmessy@gmail.com. Once again, thank you so much for listening and keep it messy.